Right. Well, it would be really interesting to hear about that, but can you first introduce yourself for our viewers and supporters and tell a little bit about your organization? And also, we have an upfront question right away. How did you become a communist and how did you join the movement? So if you could make an introduction like that.
Sure. So I'm Greg Butterfield. I'm a member of Workers' World Party, which is a communist organization in the United States that's been around since 1959. I'm a contributing editor to our weekly newspaper, Workers' World. And for the last 4 years, I've been coordinating solidarity and outreach with the movement in Ukraine and Donbass, fighting against the U.S.-backed junta through the International Action Center, which is a mass anti-war organization that we participate in. I've been active in the struggle since I was in high school back in the late 1980s, and I lived in a very isolated rural part of the United States. I came to New York in 1990 and joined Workers' World Party. And what really drove my participation and interest at first was the class struggle where I grew up in poverty and surrounded by the indigenous Native American culture that was repressed in that area. These are the things that kind of drove me into the struggle, and after coming to New York, I certainly broadened my horizons a lot and joined in the international struggles as well.
All right. Could you tell us if you remember the first event that you attended or participated in, like a political event?
The first political event I participated in was a protest on a Native American reservation, which is almost like an apartheid kind of setup that exists in many parts of the United States, where indigenous people are forced to live in order to maintain their culture. And in this instance, it was there were a white racist movement trying to stop the indigenous people from hunting and fishing in their traditional way at this location. And some of us who opposed those attacks on the indigenous people came out to defend them as they were fishing on their lake. That was a very dramatic process because there were only a few of us who were white workers who were supporting the Native American people, and the other side the racists had guns, rifles, etc., and were very threatening. So that kind of dropped me into the deep end of participating in the struggle.
Okay, and when was that?
This was around 1987.
Mm-hmm. That's a while ago.
When I was in high school, yeah. I was 16, I think, at the time.
Okay, Greg, and could you tell us what is your perspective, your view on the communist movement in the world, like in general? Do you think that it is in crisis, and what are the reasons for this crisis, and what are the perspectives?
Well, there's a lot of history you could go through about how the communist movement in the late 20th century got diverted in a lot of ways, either through revisionism and ultra-leftism. But I think what's important for us to focus on right now is that since the fall of the Soviet Union 25 years ago, and a new movement is emerging now a new communist movement in many ways of young people. It's apparent in the former Soviet Union. It's apparent throughout the world, and especially here in the U.S. now in the last couple of years. We've just seen an explosive growth of the left, both in sort of social democratic support for the candidacy of Bernie Sanders in the last election, but also after the elections, many people were radicalized. Our recruitment of youth has grown tremendously in the past year, and we feel like there's a real opportunity now when capitalism is presenting so many young people, especially with no options, no future, that to really revive a militant communist movement in the tradition of the Bolsheviks and the early Communist International. That's what we're focused on. That's what we're trying to do here in the U.S., trying to reach out and find like-minded comrades.
Okay, I was wondering if you could tell us how do you reach out to these young people? How do you get them involved, informed, and active?
Okay. Well, we, as a communist organization, we still use a lot of the traditional means that have been used, such as, we publish a weekly newspaper as well as on the web. We use word of mouth, we use leaflets, and of course today social media is a big aid in our struggle, although it has contradictions, because here in the U.S. there's increasing censorship of radicals using social media. But really today the thing that we're finding the most effective with the new generation that's coming around is bold actions. For example, our comrades in the city of Durham, North Carolina, last year, as you know, took the initiative to topple a Confederate statue that represents the racist right wing, and this kind of dramatic militant action has brought a lot of interest and attention from young people who have been radicalized by the growth of the ultra-right in the United States in the last few years, who want to fight back, who hate racism, who hate the oppression of poor and working people. So it's really changed a lot in the last couple of years. Before that, there was a process of recruiting in very small numbers, and often, working with someone, talking with them a lot, just to convince them that communism was something they might have an interest in. Now, here in the U.S. at least, what we're seeing is that a lot of young people are coming to that conclusion on their own and looking for who is out there, who is raising the red flag, who is ready to fight the fascists in the streets. And so by being out there in the vanguard, we are experiencing a great deal of growth right now.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And is there any theoretical work that is done in your organization? Like, how do you educate people that come to you?
This is one of our biggest challenges, I must say, right now, and we've spent a lot of time working on it over the last year. After decades, really, since the 1960s and early 1970s, which was the last upsurge of the struggle in the United States, since that time, we have been very focused as a party on keeping our revolutionary ideas alive, continuing to engage with the working class whenever possible, and recruiting people in small numbers. But now suddenly we have very large numbers of people coming in who are young, enthusiastic, don't have a lot of experience. And so one of our challenges right now is trying to remember how to educate large numbers of people, incorporate them into our work in an ongoing way. So we've been doing a lot of work on that, and we have most of our branches now across the U.S. have weekly or biweekly educational classes for candidate members. We conduct regular public forums in different cities on urgent topics of the day. And we also spend a lot of effort on making videos of the different talks and classes, getting them out widely online so that this educational material can be shared more widely.
So can anybody join your party, or are there some requirements, something you have to pass to get in?
We have a candidacy program, which again, it's something that we're refining now because of the influx of people. But we think it's important. We're not at the stage of being a mass party by any means. So it's important for us, in order to maintain the political integrity of the Leninist tendency, to have a process where there's education for prospective members, participation in our activities, so that they can see and we can see if our ideology and our practice lines up and is a good match. Usually this process takes about 6 months, and again, it's something where we're trying to be more active about it because we have a lot more people coming around now.
Okay, thank you. And back to the international work in the world. What are some of the movements that you support and you think that should be supported?
There are so many. One thing about being an activist and a revolutionary in the United States, because the U.S. is the center of world imperialism, we really have to make an effort to be in solidarity with all the struggles around the world against imperialism. Because there's, if you look at a map of the world and see how many U.S. military bases there are, if you look at how the U.S. Controls and manipulates international financial bodies like the IMF and the World Bank, there's no country in the world that's not affected by U.S. imperialism. And for us, being internationalists and fighting against imperialism is the highest principle and priority for communists in this country. We make a lot of effort around wherever the U.S. is militarily involved or trying to provoke crisis. Obviously, we do we have a lot of interaction with our comrades in Latin America, in Cuba, in Haiti, in Venezuela, and especially at this time with Venezuela that's under attack from the U.S. We have been working to support the people of Puerto Rico, which is a U.S. colony, in their liberation struggle, and particularly right now after the recent hurricane that devastated the island and the very poor support, disaster relief that was provided by the U.S. government. There's a tremendous amount of work that needs to be done there. Around the world, we've been very active in fighting against the U.S. intervention in Syria, both through its proxies and now its direct intervention, and trying, to the way the U.S. is trying to create a terrible clash between the Syrian government and the Kurds, as well as involving Turkey and Iraq and other forces. We're trying to provide clarity and particularly oppose and show that the U.S. just needs to get out of that region. We do a lot of work around Palestine, supporting the political prisoners there, and opposing U.S. support for the Israeli apartheid state. Of course, we've tried to provide support for Donbass and the struggle of the anti-fascists inside Ukraine. And right now, we're also putting a lot of priority on solidarity with our comrades in Asia, with the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, which Trump continues to threaten, and in the Philippines, where it's not getting a lot of attention, but there's a lot of growth of U.S. intervention in support of the Duterte dictatorship that's trying to repress the people's movements in the Philippines. So those are a few of the many international struggles that we try to be involved in. We participate in as many international communist and anti-imperialist forums as possible. Given our limited resources, we can't always, travel to participate in things. We're very active with the International League of People's Struggle, which is a alliance of communist-led mass world that was initiated by the Communist Party of the Philippines. And here in the U.S., the Filipino diaspora supporters of the Communist Party of the Philippines play a very important role in the movement, and we work very closely with them.
All right. So what are some of the short-term goals or immediate goals of your organization? What do you want to get done in the next year or a couple years?
So in terms of our short-term goals, I think the most urgent thing that we feel is to fight against the growth of the white supremacist and neo-Nazi movement in the United States, which, if left unchecked, could threaten every worker and workers' organization in the country. Just yesterday in Seattle, Washington, there was a neo-Nazi rally at a university, and the police and the neo-Nazis teamed up to attack anti-fascist counter-protesters using tear gas and arresting. This kind of thing is happening on a regular basis now. People are probably aware of what happened last summer in Charlottesville when the anti-fascist movement confronted a large gathering of neo-Nazis, and one activist, Heather Heyer, was killed. But smaller versions of those kind of clashes are happening on a regular basis all over the country now. And we feel it's really important. The highest priority for us is to be out there fighting the white supremacists whenever they rear their head, and encouraging people to get involved in that struggle, because all of the wonderful work we want to do in workplaces, in schools, the anti-war work we want to do is all threatened if the neo-Nazis and the capitalist state together are able to run rampant and repress our movements. The other thing that we are now giving a lot of attention to, and we will be mobilizing around in the spring, is the war drive against Russia, against Korea, the escalation of the occupation in Syria, because as the economy here is in crisis, as evidenced by the crazy turbulence on Wall Street over the last couple of weeks, there's going to be more and more pressure from different sectors of the ruling class to distract the workers here from their crisis by going to war. That's been their traditional means of dealing with economic crisis for many decades, and the Trump regime certainly shows every evidence of wanting to continue that tradition. At the same time, the Democrats who pretend to be a resistance to Trump are pushing for war against Russia. So there's a lot of work for us to do in that respect, and to bring these two struggles together. We want to unite the anti-war struggle and the anti-fascist struggle and show how they're one movement against racist imperialism.
Greg, and why do you think we see this rise of the neo-Nazi movement right now? Why now?
Traditionally, the U.S. ruling class has kept very close ties and relationship with white supremacist and neo-Nazi movements. They keep them supplied with money, with connections to weaponry. Of course, the police agencies and the military contain a lot of fascist elements. And when there is a crisis, political or economic crisis, they will pull them out of mothballs, so to speak, bring them to the fore. This has been going on in the recent period, for several years now, as the more and more young people and working people in general are excluded from the workforce or forced to take very low-paying jobs because the capitalist economy is no longer creating long-term employment or good-paying jobs. As more and more nationally oppressed workers and poor workers are being pushed into prison because there's no prospect of them ever having a job under this system. And growing alongside that crisis has been a resurgence of the white supremacist movement, which is the U.S. version of the neo-Nazis that we see in places like Ukraine and across Europe. It's rooted in the specific history of the United States as a country that, as a settler state that committed genocide against the indigenous peoples of North America, enslaved Africans as the basis for building their economy, and continues to use racism as the main means that they use to divide the working class and keep us from uniting to fight back. But particularly we can say, without a doubt, that since the Trump campaign began at the end of 2015, since Trump's election, his statements and conduct in support of the ultra-right has opened up a lot of space for neo-Nazi forces to speak in the media, to hold public events, to recruit people, and openly. And it's something that has alarmed a lot of people. It has alarmed the union movement, progressive organizations, human rights organizations, but they have no perspective on how to fight back. Their approach is to appeal to the Democratic Party and to the state, the capitalist state, to protect them. And so it's really on us as communists and other left-wing forces to show that how to fight back against fascism is not to sit back and wait for the ruling class to protect you or wait for the state to protect you, because usually they collaborate with each other. The way to fight back is to organize the people from the grassroots and go out and confront these forces.
Thank you. So now we're going to move with our questions to the former Soviet Union. And I know that you've visited here a couple times, right?
Yes.
You've seen some events. You've talked to people. So what is your view of the communist movement now, the way it is now in the ex-Soviet Union?
First, I want to say that I think that the comrades in the former Soviet Union really are doing an amazing job under the terrible circumstances that they face and the really unprecedented historical conditions that exist because of the destruction of the Soviet Union and much of the socialist camp 25 years ago. What really has been heartening to me and inspiring for our party, Workers' World Party, has been to see how a new generation of communists has grown up and taken the lead in many different places over the last few years. And I've been fortunate to actually see this with my own eyes on a couple of occasions, and to be in regular contact with comrades like you who are part of that process. But it's really great to see how young people, especially who came to political life after the destruction of socialism in the Soviet Union, and many who were born after the reintroduction of capitalism, have rejected the lies of the counter-revolution and are bringing new life and new ways of organizing and new ways of thinking into the communist movement there. I've had the chance to meet with folks in the Donbass republics, in Russia, in Moldova, and other places. And, the organizing takes many different forms. Some people are working in organizations that are brand new. Some are working in organizations that have a direct connection to Soviet times. But everyone is grappling with how to keep and use what was best from the Soviet experience, while also learning from other struggles and movements around the world, and trying to find ways to work together. And that's really inspiring, and I think is a really great hope for the future. That the struggle is not over in this former Soviet Union by any means. It's finding its way forward under incredibly difficult conditions. But it's this new generation of people who have lived the horror of capitalism that are going to be the driving force toward a new socialist future in the former Soviet Union.
That's quite optimistic. Good to hear. So what, in your opinion, are some of the difficulties or mistakes that are made by younger communists, not only younger, in Russia and also in the US?
I think that the biggest struggle that we've had to overcome and continue to have to overcome is um, the tendency towards reformist thinking um, that compromise with capitalism or imperialism is somehow the only viable way to advance the struggle or just to survive. And that's something that infected a lot of communist parties and infected the Communist Party of the Soviet Union for many years. It certainly infected the Communist Party of the United States, which we separated from very long ago because of that. And so I think that again, what's exciting about the new generation of people who are coming around here and elsewhere around the world is that they're a little bit separated from that. People are being driven by their own experiences of repression and hopelessness of the future under capitalism, and are more willing, I think, to embrace bold solutions, in a revolutionary perspective. It's a contradiction of the terrible setback that the world movement experienced with the fall of the Soviet Union. In one sense, it was the greatest defeat we've ever experienced. At the same time, a lot of the old preconceptions that maybe were holding the movement back were swept aside with that defeat, and now there's an opportunity to rebuild a more revolutionary perspective. So, we're always trying to find where the next struggle is going to come from, who's going to be leading it, how we can be helpful, and learn from the lessons of the past in order not to repeat those mistakes, but also make sure that we preserve the most important lessons. Our party founder and chief theoretician Sam Marcy, back in the early 90s, at a meeting, at an international communist meeting in Europe, had argued for the surviving revolutionary communists of the world to unite around Lenin's 21 rules of admission to the Communist International from the early years of the Soviet Union, as a way to learn to work together around principles that we share, even if we come from different historical trends and backgrounds, and that have been separated by sectarianism over many decades. So, that's kind of where we're coming from. We want to revive those revolutionary principles as a basis of unity in the international communist movement, and learn through struggling together against our class enemies, learn to work together and forge a higher unity that way.
Okay. You mentioned your trip to the Donbas region earlier. Could you share with us what is your most memorable moment of this trip?
I had the great opportunity to visit both Donetsk and Lugansk in 2016. And there were so many amazing people and things that I saw. Two things in particular stand out to me. One was visiting the outskirts of the capital of Donetsk and seeing just the utter devastation of the residential areas that had been made basically uninhabitable by the bombing of the Ukrainian forces. And yet, there's still many people who lived in that area, who had recently returned at the time that I visited, when the bombing had subsided a little bit. But it was really nothing could prepare you for seeing that human devastation of homes and livelihoods stripped away like that. The other thing that I remember very well was being in the capital of Lugansk on Victory Day, when people came out in thousands into the streets to join the Victory Day parade. And I especially remember I was fortunate to be invited to join the delegation of the Lugansk communists, and standing alongside little Liza Chalenko, who was the 3-year-old daughter at the time of the Lugansk communist leader, Maxim Chalenko, and thinking about my own kids and how Liza was just an infant when the Ukrainian forces were bombing the capital of Lugansk, and what that must have been like for her parents. And seeing especially the young people all around at the parade, participating, holding signs with photos of their ancestors who had fought in the Great Patriotic War, and thinking how the struggle against fascism was not just a history lesson for them. It's a living, breathing struggle that they actually are living through right now. And how, what an inspiring thing it is to be part of that, and to have the opportunity to stand alongside such courageous people. That definitely was the outstanding experience for me in Donbass.
Right. You mentioned now that you were thinking of your own kids, so I know you're a father. Could you share, do you talk to kids about your organizing work, and do you explain to them why you do what you do?
Yeah, it's, well, I have 2 daughters, and they've both been activists since they were born, basically. They both started attending protests when they were infants. But what I always try to do is talk to them before we go to a demonstration, or when I have to go on a trip or give a talk, explain to them in terms that they can relate to what this struggle is about. And certainly here in the US, there are a lot of struggles that children have. Police brutality, underfunding of schools, homelessness, hunger, so much that kids, especially in a big city like New York, go through. So I find that it's not too hard to explain. For example, with my trip to Donbass, we talked about how children were being affected and how many kids had died or lost their homes or their parents to the bombing of the Ukrainian forces, and the U.S. responsibility for the coup and for arming the Ukrainian forces, and how it was our responsibility to help. One thing that we have done is try to be involved with the Komsomol's efforts in Lugansk. They have done a lot of activities like book drive for kids, organizing parties, organizing letter writing campaigns of kids to the UN, stuff like that. So we try to be involved with that. My youngest daughter helped me pick out some books that were bilingual Russian and English books that I could bring with me on my trip to donate to the Komsomol's book drive for children. We worked together to organize a protest at the United Nations after I came back, where we translated and read out letters from young people in Donetsk and Lugansk about what they had seen and what they faced and what they wanted for their future. which was to be free of the threat of war, to go to school and have a future. And so we try to find ways to make it relatable and something that they'd be excited to participate in.
When we prepared questions for this interview, one of my comrades asked, how do you see international, and if you see any international solidarity projects? So actually this interview is, we hope, a part of series of interviews with different activists and people around the world that in the long term will bring this community closer and will bring people together. Do you have, what do you think about that? And do you have any other ideas about international solidarity work?
I think that's wonderful. I really applaud your initiative on pulling together these interviews, and I'm really excited to see all of the ones that will be coming forward. As I mentioned, we, as Workers' World Party and through our mass organizations, we try as much as possible to participate in international, any international forums of the left. Just for practical reasons, we tend to do that more in the Western Hemisphere. We have a lot of interaction with the left in Latin America, but I think that we feel, and our first secretary of our party, Larry Holmes, often talks about how the situation really in the world really cries out for a new international formation of revolutionary forces, whatever we want to call that, if we call it an international, if we call it a forum, if we call it a united front, whatever form it may take. It's so urgently needed, and I think that one of the things that is one of the most urgent struggles in the world right now has to do with migrant workers and refugees, many of whom have been driven out of their homelands either by imperialist war, as in the case of Syria and Iraq and in North Africa and so on, or because of the imperialist robbery of economies from the Philippines to all throughout Latin America, and particularly here in the U.S. we think of Mexico in that respect, and how the ultra-right forces are using the issue of migration of workers as a way to try to create xenophobia and really set workers against each other. The tradition of the communist movement is one of internationalism and working class solidarity across borders. And so, it's sad to see even some forces in the movement become infected with this anti-migrant, anti-refugee ideas that come from the ruling class. So we feel it's really important to revive the internationalist traditions of the communist movement in the most rapid way possible, while respecting the different traditions that different parties come out of, finding common ground for united work, without saying anybody has to give up their tradition or their particular ideological viewpoint, but finding ways as communists, finding the issues that we can work on together and building unity that way.
What is the role of the representatives of the ethnic minorities in your movement? So, because we know there are people from Latin America in your party, right? From the Black communities. So, what is their role? Do they have any leadership positions?
Our tradition in Workers' World Party is that we strive to make the movement as diverse as possible, and to give every worker from every background, from every country, from the nationally oppressed workers, migrants, women, LGBT, disabled, to unite as many sections of our class as possible. And within our party, we also struggle to do that, and that's been something that we've done ever since we were founded, is to elevate the leadership of especially nationally oppressed and women comrades. Our leadership body, the Secretariat, is primarily made up of nationally oppressed and women and LGBT comrades, and that's something that we've developed over many decades. Again, because we see that racism, sexism, homophobia, and other ways that the ruling class uses to divide workers in the U.S. is really decisive. And we want to be a party that represents all sectors of our class. So we try to always provide opportunities for new comrades coming in from who may come from other countries or whose families come from different ethnic backgrounds, to give them the opportunity to play leading roles in the struggle and in the party. And that's something we're very proud of, and we try to help and encourage our comrades elsewhere when we can to adopt that perspective. So it's something we value a lot, and it's something we're very proud of, and we believe is in the tradition that Lenin laid down for the Bolshevik Party with his analysis of imperialism and the national question.
Thank you. And there is one more question. Goes like this: What happens to people who lost their homes and jobs during the crisis, and whether they've become socialist supporters?
Yes, I think we have seen a real change in consciousness since the collapse of the economy around 2007, and an increasing radicalization. You could almost chart it year by year over the last decade, and it's hit like a really high point in the last year or two. And I would say that a lot of the people who lost their homes and their jobs at that time are among those now who are either permanently unemployed, and in many cases, if they're Black and Latino and other nationally oppressed groups, they or their children may be in prison, because one of the ways that the capitalist class in the United States has developed to deal with the huge permanently unemployed army is to push them into jails where they do slave labor for profit. There's an unprecedented homelessness crisis in New York and other big cities. Many of the people who lost their homes at that time remain homeless or on the verge of homelessness. The cost of housing in the United States in general has soared beyond the means of many workers who are making low wages. And the jobs that have replaced those that were lost in 2007 are almost universally lower wages, without benefits, temporary, part-time. What in Europe, I think, is called precarious jobs, precarious workers. It's a real crisis. It's not on the front pages of the media here. Everybody sort of knows their own situation, but nobody talks about how it affects the whole class. And that's something we're trying to bring out in our work. I would say among those who were directly affected in 2007, not a lot of people were radicalized by that. I think a lot of them were just too devastated and concerned with trying to save some part of their livelihood and their family's livelihood. But what has happened is that their children have been radicalized, and that's forming a big. That was underscored the movement a few years ago, the Occupy Wall Street movement that's spread like wildfire across the United States. And it underscored the Bernie Sanders election campaign a couple of years ago. And now those young people are being radicalized even more and starting to find their way into the left and the revolutionary left. So the impact, we're still feeling it, and it's still growing even today.
All right. So that's about it. Thank you very much for your very thorough and very sincere answers. And I was wondering if you want to say something to the people who will watch this video at the end.
Sure. I just want to say that thank you to the comrades for organizing this and inviting me to participate. There's no way to thank you. There's no way there's really no way to put into words for me and for my party how much the experience of the Russian Revolution means to us, how much the experience of the Soviet people and their struggle against fascism and the building of socialism and their internationalism to national liberation movements all over the world for decades, and how inspired we are when people there fight back today. We were had a very close relationship in the 1990s with Viktor Anpilov, who passed away recently, who was the head of the Labor Russia movement in the 90s, and sort of, after that, when the capitalist regimes kind of stabilized after the 1990s, it was hard for us to be in contact with the communist and left movement in the former Soviet Union. And it seemed like there was not a lot happening. But it's really so inspiring and wonderful now to see people on the move again, young people especially, organizing, thinking about these questions, trying to find the way to unify as many as can be unified in the struggle. And we really salute you and hope to continue working closely with you as we work together to build a socialist future.
Thank you.
Thank you.